Okay, let's jump right in. I want you to take a second and think about exactly what you're doing right now. You're staring at a screen. And throughout this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly why that glowing rectangle in front of you holds such absolute undeniable magnetic power over your attention. We're going to figure out some really practical ways you can manage your everyday digital habits just by understanding the incredibly ancient hardware running inside your head. Picture your phone lying on the table. Suddenly, a little red notification badge flashes. Before you even consciously realize what app it is, your thumb is automatically moving to tap it. You've probably noticed your heart rate bumps up just a tiny bit, and there's this faint, low-level anxiety suddenly humming in the background of your mind. We all know this exact feeling, right? But we almost never stop to ask why our bodies physically react to a film like that. So here's the million-dollar question. Why on earth does a tiny digital icon trigger the exact same biological response as a predator rustling in the bushes? The answer is basically the core thesis of our entire session today. Your nervous system was built for the African savanna, and every single piece of software in your pocket is expertly engineered to exploit that evolutionary mismatch. You are essentially trying to navigate a hyper-modern digital empire using a Stone Age brain. The sheer scale of this mismatch is pretty staggering when you think about it. For roughly 200,000 years, our brains evolved for a world of extreme scarcity, super local information, and immediate physical dangers. Survival was a high-stakes daily lottery. Fast forward to now, and in just a blink of evolutionary time, we've dropped this ancient biological machine into a world of absolute abundance. Infinite calories, infinite stimulation, infinite social validation. Our environment completely transformed in just a few decades, but our brains, they take millennia to change. To understand why we feel so out of control, we have to look at the neuroscience. Neurobiologist Dr. Kent Berridge perfectly explains this by separating our reward system into two totally distinct neural pathways. There's wanting and there's liking. Now, liking is the actual pleasure of consuming something, but wanting, that's the intense dopamine-driven motivation to go get it. In nature, these two things were always linked, but today, the modern tech and food industries have completely hijacked your ancient wanting system. They flood your brain with dopamine, decoupling the intense drive to acquire something, like compulsively opening an app, from any actual lasting enjoyment. So if you've ever beaten yourself up over why your willpower completely evaporates when you're doom scrolling at 2 a.m. or walking past a plate of donuts, cut yourself some slack. Willpower is a totally modern luxury. Your ancestors literally never needed willpower to resist junk food or infinite digital scrolling because those things just didn't exist. You are fighting a massive internal biological civil war against a deep part of your brain that is absolutely terrified of starving or missing out on vital survival information. Let's look at how this plays out with your smartphone. Psychologist Dr. Michael Tomasello points out that human beings evolved for intense information gathering. Out on the savannah, finding a new berry bush or tracking weather patterns meant survival, so your brain rewarded that physical foraging with a hit of dopamine. Today, you do the exact same thing, but it's digital foraging. Every time you pull down to refresh a feed, it's a dopamine lottery ticket. Most of the content is totally useless, but your brain just can't resist pulling the lever for a jackpot. We are mentally foraging in a digital forest that never ever runs out of berries. But all of this constant digital foraging creates a state of perpetual exhaustion. And it comes down to how we process stress. Neurobiologist Dr. Robert Sapolsky has this great analogy. A zebra really only feels stress when it's actively being chased by a lion. It's an acute 5-minute crisis. Either the zebra escapes or it doesn't, but the stress ends. Humans, on the other hand, can trigger our amygdala and launch a full-blown fight-or-flight response purely through abstract thought. Your ancient brain literally cannot tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a vague, passive-aggressive email from your boss. And the physical toll of this evolutionary trap is incredibly severe. Because our modern abstract stressors never actually resolve, we end up living in a state of chronic hypervigilance. We're talking about bodies flooded with cortisol for weeks, months, or even years. Your sleep gets wrecked because a brain under siege won't let you safely lose consciousness. Your memory gets foggy, your immune system tanks. Your body is quite literally breaking down because your ancient brain is convinced you're permanently being hunted. And this toll isn't just physical, it completely rewires our social lives. I want you to think about the number 150. Anthropologist Dr. Robin Dunbar discovered that 150 is basically the hard cognitive limit for the number of stable social relationships a human being can maintain. 150. That is the exact optimal size of a traditional tribal community. In a local tribe of 150 people, your interactions are face-to-face, they're nuanced, and they're built on years of shared history. But today, you live in a global village of 8 billion people. You can post a single comment and be instantly exposed to thousands of anonymous strangers. The takeaway here is that our brains are utterly, fundamentally unequipped to process this massive scale of social exposure. We literally panic under the weight of an anonymous global crowd. And when that massive crowd judges you, it hurts on a deep, primal level. The neural pathways in your brain for social rejection overlap almost perfectly with the pathways for physical pain. Why? Because thousands of years ago, isolation meant certain death. So your brain interprets a mean comment online as the existential threat of tribal exile. To protect ourselves, we retreat into hypertribalism. We fiercely defend our digital bubbles, and we constantly demonize the other online, all because our ancient software is screaming at us to fight primitive turf wars just to survive. Which brings us to the ultimate tragedy of the modern human condition. There's a quote that captures this perfectly. We are gods playing with lightning bolts, yet we possess the instincts of frightened primates. Our biological need for calories created modern metabolic diseases. Our need for novel information created digital paralysis. Our sensitivity to physical danger created a society of chronic anxiety. The very survival traits that kept our ancestors alive are now the exact source of our deepest modern miseries. But if there is one thing you take away from this explainer, let it be this. Your mind is not broken. When you find it impossible to sit still for 8 hours staring at a piece of glowing glass, or when you can't resist checking a notification, you are not flawed. Your mind is actually responding beautifully, logically, and systematically to a completely alien environment. This lack of control isn't some personal failing. It's just a biological machine trying to run in the entirely wrong context. And understanding that is the very first step toward an actual practical solution. We need to use everyday mental techniques to short-circuit this fight or flight response. You can't delete 200,000 years of evolutionary coding, but you can create conscious distance. First, pause. When you feel that totally mimetic urge to scroll, recognize it for what it is. You're just digitally foraging for survival data that doesn't exist. Second, breathe. Take a breath to calm your amygdala and remind your nervous system there isn't a predator behind your monitor. And third, step back. Realize that the sudden anger and anxiety you feel online is just a primitive reaction to a phantom threat. Because willpower is a modern luxury, we can't just rely on mental tricks. We actually have to change our physical surroundings. We have to build fences. You need to actively design your daily environment to reduce digital stimulation. Leave your phone charging in another room overnight. Turn off those red notification badges that trigger your predatory reflexes. By building hard physical boundaries around your biological vulnerabilities, you consciously limit your options. That way, you don't have to rely on sheer, exhausting willpower to fight your primitive urges all day. Always keep in mind, the problem is not the machine itself. The problem is the context in which the machine is running. Your ultimate 21st century superpower isn't raw intelligence or endless productivity. It's simply maintaining awareness of this biological mismatch. It's having the capacity to look at your own impulses, that sudden urge to check your phone, or that random spike of anxiety, with a gentle scientific curiosity, rather than just blindly obeying it. I want to wrap this up by bringing you right back into the physical world. Just for a second, look away from your screen. Seriously, look at the room around you. Notice the artificial light, the temperature control, the absolute total lack of immediate physical danger. You are sitting in a hyper-modern, totally safe sanctuary, and yet, your ancient brain might still be racing. So, I'll leave you with this. Knowing that your brain essentially still lives in the Stone Age, what fences are you going to build today to protect it?